Let's talk about The Art of War by Sun Tzu. This is a book that was written 5th century BC China and was one of the first and definitely one of the most famous works on tactics and strategy that was written that we still have today. And so a lot of famous quotes come out of this book. You'll see things like, appear weak when you are strong and strong when you are weak. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Know the enemy and know thyself. Know when to fight and when not to fight. Do not press a desperate foe too hard. Avoid what is strong and strike at what is weak. These are very common quotes you'll see referenced in all sorts of movies and pop culture because it is so famous and well known. And of course, The Art of War is just great title. That is great title for that book. The core concepts of this, of course, as you can gather from the quotes, Sun Tzu is really big about deception and trickery and preparation and all sorts of different ways that you can win with minimal combat. So he talks at length about putting spies in the enemy court to know exactly how many there are, what they're doing, know what they're going to do before they even do it, have the patience, have the timing to have these elaborate maneuvers so that you can kind of enter into this battle, into warfare. If we were going to compare him to a martial art, he would be the really flashy kung fu master where everything that you do, no matter what, he just blocks and just feints, and you just can't land a hit on him, at least in theory. But of course, there are problems with this. The big problems with this is that Sun Tzu lacks a lot of insight in how. Like, he talks a lot about, things like don't press a desperate foe too hard. Well, the question is, how do you know they're desperate? What makes them desperate? Or at what point do you actually drive the knife home and finish it? Appear weak when you're strong and strong when you're weak. How do you do that? Where do you do that? There's so many contingencies where like these sound really good at like the really high level, but then how do you actually manifest these down at the operational and tactical level so that you can actually do things with them, right? It's also very hard to read. This is one of the big issues with it. If you open up any chapter in these books, a lot of time when you see Sun Tzu's writing, you get a full a paragraph of what he is saying, and then you also have to have notes from the author explaining what the hell he's talking about, because there are things that just don't make sense in the modern age. Like this is a chapter talking about all about chariots and how many chariots you have and how you substitute them. There are other ones where he has metaphors about marching in different columns, things that certainly made sense in 5th century BC China. It doesn't make as much sense today. So a lot of times you have to have authors' explanations of the historical context of what he's trying to say. And a lot of times the author's notes are much larger than the actual writings themselves. So while this book is certainly a notable size, it would probably be half the size if it was just Sun Tzu's writing. And so you have to put a lot of effort into understanding the historical context to get any real value out of it. Not to say that there isn't value in there. There certainly is, and I think, if you're really trying to learn about tactics and strategy, this is certainly a book to add to the list, but it's not the best, right? And really what that comes into is, talk about historical context. This is not a book that was written for you, and I think this is something that a lot of folks don't really recognize. In 5th century BC China, this is not a book that was written for, like, mass consumption. This was a book written for the aristocracy of China, and Sun Tzu wrote it as more of a persuasion piece than as a larger treatise like you see Clausewitz in Germany, where they're trying to actually win wars. This is not written for the great armies of Rome. This is written for a very specific time and place, that being ancient China, where, as you can see from this map, this is what 5th century BC China looked like. You have fractured kingdoms, little lordships all over the place, and each of these little kingdoms and lordships have their own cohort of little tiny, princes, lords, the aristocracy that run them. And what ended up happening in this era is that it was a perpetual state of warfare and conflict for no real purpose. The reason being is that anytime some 19-year-old lord wanted to go make a name for himself, the way it was done culturally is he would raise an army and then go to the neighboring kingdom, and then they would have this big set-piece battle where they just throw troops at each other, and then he would come home having, 10,000 troops killed and, villages starved out, and then, oh, wow, he's so great and so strong. everybody looks at him and sees a war hero. And that was just kind of the cultural norm and how the aristocracy maintained their social status and got all their accolades. And Sun Tzu saw this and was like, wait a minute, this is fucking stupid. Why are we, just grinding each other into dust for no purpose? So he saw this and wrote The Art of War to offer a different type of warfare. He's not, the reason it doesn't talk about like how to do it or why and all the different things is because he doesn't really care about the how or why to do it. The point is that he's trying to offer the aristocracy and the rich folks, the lords, a way to wage war that doesn't just destroy everything. He wants them to wage spycraft war. He wants them to, when they do raise armies, it's an elaborate maneuver warfare. They're calculating everything out. They're wargaming it all out. They're trying to win with minimal combat. They're trying to know everything about the enemy and everything about themselves. They're trying to avoid what is strong, strike as what is weak, and of course subdue the enemy without fighting, that being the supreme art of war. He wants them to look at warfare, just like he does, as a literal art, as a painter with a brush on canvas, and everyone to be able to say, wow, that's so beautiful how you did that elaborate maneuver. He's not trying to win necessarily this massive campaign. He's trying to create an alternative solution to just the chaos and massacres that are here. Because a lot of what his stuff does is that it doesn't take into account the chaos. It doesn't take into account all of the complexities of warfare, and instead just says, well, just know everything you can and there won't be any chaos, which is not a very effective way to go about warfare, which, as we talk about later on with Jomini and Clausewitz, they do a much better job of managing those sorts of principles, which, like we'll talk about. But anyway, Sun Tzu's The Art of War. Very interesting book. Really cool if you love the history of ancient China, but it has an outsized place in a lot of, those libraries of strategic treaties and everything. There are better books out there. We'll talk about more of them in the future. But now, yeah, thanks for watching.